Okay, so I should mention, I had an OS crash, and I've been restoring things, and I think I've gotten things mostly squared away, but I might have some technical difficulties to sort out. Also, I just discovered one, which is that for some reason, now that I've reinstalled everything, sometimes OBS does not detect button clicks, so I clicked the start recording button, and then started talking, and only found out 10 or 20 minutes later that it had recorded nothing. So there's at least one technical glitch we've identified already. So here we go for attempt 2, keeping a careful eye on that status monitor, and I hopefully we won't have any other particularly fierce technical issues. One other thing that you might notice is that my already poor handwriting and drawing skills are going to be even worse than usual, and that's because I can't get my tablet to map to only this monitor. So I have to use the left half of it, otherwise it starts writing on the other monitor. I don't know why that is the case, but we're just kind of going to go with it. We don't care enough to fix that right now. So, when we talked about recurrent neural networks, we talked about backpropagation through time, where we take our one recurrent layer. Again, when the tablet is sort of weirdly compressing your drawing area, this is difficult, right? Where we take our one recurrent layer and we unroll it into this chain, right, of copies of that layer, one per time step, that all share weights, right? So in the forward pass, we use the recurrent connections, right? And we treat this as one layer. In the backward pass, when we update the weights, we use this backprop-through-time thing, where we sort of expand it into this giant deep network where there's one layer per time step, right? So if we had 1,000 items in the sequence, when we perform backprop-through-time, we expand it into a 1,000-layer network where all of the layers share weights, right? We get hit pretty hard by the vanishing and exploding gradient problems when we do this, right? Because many of those weights are showing up repeatedly, right? And every one of them is sort of... So every unit at a certain time, right, has a connection to every other unit. So this is unit I at time t, has a connection to unit I at time t plus 1, and because all the layers are shared, whatever that weight is gets repeated, right? So it keeps showing up because the connection to I t plus 2 is the same weight because of the weight sharing, and so on and so on and so on and so on forever, right? That means, to quote the original long short-term memory paper, this one, that the error exponentially depends on those weights, right? Our error signal potentially gets multiplied by the same weight over and over and over again. So if that weight is less than 1, for example, if one of the recurrent weights is less than 1, and we have 1,000 elements in the sequence, then we might have a term of less than 1 times, to the 1,000 in there, which will obviously cause that error to vanish. Or, if one of those weights becomes greater than 1, we might have a term of greater than 1 times 1,000, which causes our weights to blow up, right? Our update becomes arbitrarily huge, our weight updates explode, and we wind up with nan in the output, right? And I should say, this line is actually quoting another paper, but the other paper they quoted is by one of the previous authors, Hochreiter. Okay, so the Hochreiter and Schmidt-Huber paper, this one, long short-term memory, for this line quoted one of Hochreiter's previous papers that is in German. And I can't even almost translate that for you, so I'm going to give the citation as long short-term memory. All right. So we also have the problem of history truncation, right? If the sequence is 300,000 elements long, right, we cannot commit to storing all of those steps in memory, right? So we might truncate the history to 500, 100, whatever, right? That means, among other problems, that if the lag between some input event and the response we want is longer than our history width. So if we have 700 steps between the event and the response, but we have a truncated 500 width history, then our RNN can never learn that, right? It will not have a long enough backprop-through-time window for the network to learn to record this event and then count to 700 before responding, right? That can't happen. So our RNNs, besides the vanishing and exploding gradient problems affecting the weights, have the additional problem that if we have to truncate the history, we just cannot learn a long time lag sequence, right? A final problem, or if not exactly a problem, because mathematically, a final problem is that they don't have special memory units, right? So every unit H gets one input from the input and one recurrent input, right? And every unit H has one output connection and one recurrent connection, right? So H could be used to perform computation from the input and recurrent to the output, or it could be used to carry data forward, right? To learn to act as a memory, to sort of update itself with a prior state and then ignore the input, right? If the network wants to learn to use some hidden units as outputs or some hidden units for computation and then other units for memories, it has to learn to do that, right? So remembering, to paraphrase another paper, and I can't remember which, right? But for an RNN, it might not even be. Okay, paraphrasing something, I should have a citation for you, but I don't, right? But to paraphrase, remembering is a learned behavior for an RNN. It has to learn to do that, okay? Enter the long short-term memory. The long short-term memory addresses a bunch of these problems. So it uses constant error carousels, or CECs, right, to keep the gradient from vanishing or exploding on the recurrent connection, right? So a constant error carousel is basically, if you will, an error channel through time that has a gradient of 1, right? So it neither shrinks nor explodes. And it is built using dedicated memory cells coupled to gate units, right? So because it has dedicated memory cells, remembering, lordy lord. Remembering things is a default behavior for LSTMs, right? They're biased toward doing that. They don't need to learn to do it, right? They do still need to learn what to remember and when to forget it, but learning is a sort of default behavior they will be drawn towards, right? And I should mention, constant error carousel, or CEC, is a term from the original Schmidt-Huber and Hochreiter paper, but it's not a term I've ever seen anywhere again, and it's on a term I don't think I've ever seen somebody use. And at least once I've said that and had somebody stare at me like I was insane. So what I'm getting at is, this term may not have entered common parlance, and you might get that reaction at some point, right? If you say constant error carousel, somebody might be like, what? Because I don't think other practitioners describe these things the same way Schmidt-Huber and Hochreiter do. All right, so let's have a video break now.